This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey guys, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano and my email address is jason@sportspectrum.com. jason@sportspectrum.com. You can reach me there if you got any guest ideas or any thoughts on today's show with Jon Tyson, who is the author of a new book, Beautiful Resistance. He's also the pastor of Church of the City in New York City, and he joins us today. Before we get to Jon, I want to just tell you about our partners today. Brought to you by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. You can make a difference in a child's life, releasing them from poverty right now by teaming up with Compassion. Go to compassion.com/team up, compassion.com/team up, and pray about releasing a child from poverty today. We're also presented by Water Mission, and we love Water Mission, a nonprofit Christian engineering ministry that fights the global water crisis and stopping right now the global spread of COVID-19 by providing urgently needed safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions to refugees, settlements, and other vulnerable communities. You can learn more and pray with them right now by going to watermission.org, watermission.org. Very excited to welcome today Jon Tyson. He is the author of the new book, Beautiful Resistance, The Joy of Conviction in a Culture of Compromise. Has there ever been a time where our culture is compromising on a lot of different things? And this is a very timely book by Jon Tyson. He is also a pastor of Church of the City down in New York City, right in Manhattan. He said his church is located in Times Square, 45th and 9th, right in the center of Manhattan. So he is living this right now, both from a pastor perspective, because he is, pastoring a church during a pandemic. He's also gone through this whole COVID-19 himself. Him and his family, his entire family got COVID-19 very early on back in March and had to kind of deal and walk through that aspect of all of this. So he shares about that. He also came from Australia. That's where he is originally from, and moved here about 20 years ago to plant a church in New York City. So he's got a great accent, by the way, when he calls me mate, which I love. You can call me mate any day and I'll be your friend. And Jon does that quite a few times here on the show. So he's a great guy. His book is really good. He's also a huge boxing and UFC fan. Growing up in Australia, he was a boxer, a basketball player. And he's got a lot of cool things to talk about here, specifically mentoring his son and his daughter and helping them grow up in the faith. And then why he wrote this book, Beautiful Resistance. This is a great conversation. I think you'll enjoy it with Jon Tyson right here on Sports Spectrum. Take a listen. Jon, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Thanks so much for having me, mate. It is a joy to be on here.
Absolutely. It's a joy to talk to you. Let's learn about your journey a little bit before we get into the book. And again, it's an awesome message, your new book, and I'm really excited about talking about it. But let's learn a little bit about your journey. It's brought you to New York, literally from the other side of the world.
Yeah. I originally grew up in Australia, so I lived there till I was 20. I became a Christian. On the weekend, I turned 17 at a big Pentecostal youth camp, and felt called to the United States. Just had this deep, deep impression from the Holy Spirit that I was meant to come and be a part of whatever God was doing here. So I actually dropped out of high school at 16 to be a butcher. So I'm a butcher by training. And then when I was 20, I got a scholarship to study theology, moved over to the US. And for the last 15 years, I've lived in Manhattan and have spent my time planting churches. So kind of an eclectic story that I never scripted myself. Definitely feels like, God's been taking me on a little bit of a wild journey, but I'm definitely grateful to be here. Consider America home, particularly New York. My primary identity would be a New Yorker. I've been there a long time, and it definitely feels like home. So,
well, I mean, you just crammed like 5 hours of conversation that we could have into one answer in terms of being a butcher and dropping out of high school and then getting a scholarship. So I presume you got your GED or whatever the equivalent.
That's the miracle, mate. I didn't do any of that. They just let me in. I don't even know if it's legal. I won't tell you. It's a fully accredited school. It's not like backyard Bible college. It's a fully accredited school, but they just found a way to make it work as an international student.
That's awesome. Really cool. Now tell me about sports, how that played a role in your life growing up. You and I were texting a little bit before the interview just about, in high school, I know boxing and basketball were something that you were really interested in. Tell us about sports and the role it played.
Yeah, well, in Australia, sport is religion. And so, cricket, Aussie rules football. So Australia, basically half of Australia is almost exclusively Aussie rules football. The other half is rugby. I'm from the Aussie rules football side. Now it's a little more blended, and soccer's definitely had a little bit more of a rise. So I grew up loving football, but in high school, I don't know how I got into it, but maybe one of my friends was doing boxing at a place called the Lodge Boxing Club. And he said, come and try this out. And so I just got into it, and I just loved it. I loved the training. I loved the skill. I love the idea of, hit and don't be hit. And so I did that for several years and found a ton of life in it. It was in the best shape of my life. I remember, running maybe 5 miles to training for 2 hours and running 5 miles home and getting home and feeling awesome, going, whatever peak fitness is, I'm living it. And then I did high school. I hit puberty early, and I was pretty tall as a 13. I'm 6'1", and I was 6'1" when I was like 12 or 13. And wow. I never grew after that, unfortunately. But so I everyone was like, you should play basketball. So I started in the 6th grade and ended up playing on what was, I still don't quite know the US equivalent, but maybe 5A state basketball team. Like our team was the state championships. So we got to play at the equivalent of Madison Square Garden in our city. And it was like a decent sized deal. And I loved it. I loved being on a team. I loved competing. I loved all of that stuff. So yeah, sports has definitely played a formative role in my life growing up.
So are you still playing pickup occasionally, picking up a basketball and going on a run?
Not too often. Last summer, I did this sort of journey on manhood for my son. He's now 20, but when he's 13, we kicked off this 6-year discipleship manhood sort of journey. And to conclude it, we hiked 500 miles across Spain doing the Camino de Santiago. Wow. So the biggest physical thing I've done recently was walk 500 miles across Spain in the middle of a heat pandemic last summer.
Oh my goodness. Did you keep all your steps too? Did you count the steps?
Oh yeah. I mean, the steps every day were like, 35,000 steps. And I mean, it was brutal. I was looking at how many calories I was burning off, and you're eating everything you can. For breakfast, you're having 2 chocolate croissants, 2 lattes, ham and cheese sandwiches. And I think by the end of it all, I dropped 20 pounds after eating everything I wanted every day, all day. It was a really great experience. Very meaningful, my time with him.
Tell me about this discipleship experience with your son. I've not heard, I know I talk to a lot of people, a lot of pastors and people who are really strong in their faith. And certainly discipleship is at the core of our faith, but this sounds a little different and unique. Can you kind of share what you did there with your son?
Yeah, I basically, I was a youth pastor before I was a senior pastor, like a lot of people's sort of ministry journeys. And when I was a youth pastor, I was assigned to do high school campus ministry, like an online campus coach sort of a thing, like a chaplain. And I kept bumping into a certain kind of person at the school that was they stood out from every other student. And so I'd always engage these students, and I found out they were all Mormons. So I went to the local Mormon stake leader and I said, what do you do to disciple your young people? And so we basically said, we have a 4-year journey where they do an hour of seminary before school every day. And then at the end of it, they go on a 2-year journey. And I was like, we don't have anything like that in the Christian tradition that I'm aware of. And so I said, and my son at the time was 2, I said, I need to spend some time reading and working on this. So I ended up building a 6-year pathway that I called the Primal Path. It's built on 4 phases. Preparation, like a dad's got to get his own house in order, dealing with your own brokenness, dealing with your own father wounds, dealing with your own life lessons, sort of auditing your own story so you can make sense of what you want to leave behind and what you want to carry forward into your son's life. Then initiation, which is about how to bring him into this journey. So like the classic, all the things you can imagine, but how to do that. Then a formation journey that moves through the major roles and lessons a man has to learn with a sense of accomplishment, like he had to actually prove he'd learned it. And then, so formation is the third part. And then recognition, which was, so my son did a gap year, which was a huge part of it. He went to 4 countries serving the poor. And then to end it, I said, if you're willing to walk 500 miles across Spain, I'll put $6,000 in a Roth IRA, so you learn the power of compound interest, that what you do as a young man pays off as an old man. So he did that. And so it was just like a journey. It's a course. You can go to primalpath.co and you can buy it and you can figure out how to do this for your own son. So I've had hundreds of dads go through it, and the feedback so far has been very, very strong. But it changed my life. And it's my son, if you were to meet him, is like a wonderful, godly, thoughtful, respectful young man with a ton of initiative. So it's been the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
That's amazing. I don't have a son, I have a daughter, but just the idea of being, people talk about being intentional as parents. Yeah. That's really just half the battle of parenting, is being intentional with your kids. But that takes intentionality, if that's even a word, to another level, I think, Jon. That's so awesome that you decided to do that. How have you seen the reaction from the Primal Path, from others who've gone through it? Obviously, everybody's journey is a little different, but I have to imagine it's got to be pretty awesome, some of the reactions you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm actually working, so my daughter's a senior in high school now, and I've got a thing for daughters, dads and daughters, called 50 Pieces of My Heart, 50 key deposits every father has to put in his daughter's life. So it basically takes the 12 major issues a young woman needs to succeed in life and spends a month drilling deep in each of those. So I'm working on that right now with my daughter. The feedback's been very, very strong, because my basic tagline that I talked about is, I want to help overwhelmed but determined dads raise kids of consequence. So most dads are like, my dad was good, but there was a lot of holes, and I want to take this to the next level, or maybe I didn't have a dad. Yeah. And their vision is to basically, like, how do I pass on generational blessing and stop generational curses? Get rid of the cycles of dysfunction. But nobody really has a plan on how to do it. So there's a massive heart without an actual plan. And so my goal was to connect heart and plan so that dads felt empowered and they were able to go out and do it. So the feedback's been very, very encouraging so far. And there's something profound in a man's heart about knowing I'm doing this right. I'm not doing it perfect, but I'm going to be able to put my head down, on the pillow when I die, and say, I gave everything to those vital teenage years to walk my son from adolescence into manhood. So there's a deep sense of relief, and I think a deep sense of satisfaction are probably the two strongest feelings people report back.
Jon Tyson is our guest here on Sports Spectrum, pastor at Church of the City down in New York City, and he's got a new book, Beautiful Resistance, The Joy of Conviction in a Culture of Compromise. Why this book? Why this topic? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Beautiful Resistance. I mean, why the topic? I'll start with that. I mean, the times that we live in demand a book like this.
Yeah,
these are disorienting times. These are times of tremendous compromise, particularly in our culture at large. And I feel like we've just lost our bearings on what it means to be followers of Jesus in a world like ours. And so I wanted to sort of like put some anchoring practices of faithfulness into the hands of disciples of Jesus so they could resist the pull of culture and actually be the good news and alternative, compelling alternative community that Jesus calls us to be. So yeah, I wrote this in many ways, partly for my own discipleship as a little bit of a personal manifesto. Secondly, for our church. Our church is in the middle of Manhattan. We meet in the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, and in Times Square. And so I've got a congregation full of people in a very contested space asking, help me be faithful. The world feels like it's just losing it. Like we have no cultural bearings of what it means to be, good people anymore. So how can the way of Jesus become good news? So I wrote it in many ways to my church, but I definitely feel like it's an overflow message to the church at large right now.
What's it like to pastor a church in New York City? I mean, there's this stigma, I think, especially from people of faith in the South, that it's this Northeast, liberal, left wing, whatever classification or title you want to put on someone, non-believing area. And there are some truths to that, I think, up here in the Northeast. I'm here too in Connecticut. Yeah. But what's it like to pastor a church and to know that there are still people out there, a lot of people who are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, if you will, for Jesus, and being in the largest city in the United States? What's this been like for you?
Yeah, well, it's been the most joy-filled, life-giving thing I've ever done, and it's been the most horrific, painful, brutal thing I've ever done, man. There's no middle in New York City.
Yeah.
It's all extremes. It's all in the wings. So yeah, the conception that New York is a progressive, left-leaning city with very little interest in traditional religion, particularly any form of like evangelical Christianity,
Sure.
is it's not a stereotype. That's reality. We do not get a warm reception in general. But I will say, secularism is failing America, and it's failing individuals. And so people are, they've successfully, like, just like Christians would try and cast a demon out of someone to bring freedom, New York has tried to cast religion out of society in such a way that people could be free from concepts like sin and judgment and those sorts of things. And yet they're still haunted by longings for meaning and truth and beauty and depth and wonder and how to atone for the primal mistakes they perceive they have made and how to appease their guilt. So as it turns out, the gospel is very, very good news when you understand the grace of Jesus, because secularism is harsh and it's unkind and there's no forgiveness. So people are often find Jesus very subversive compared to what they thought it was, and surprisingly life-giving. So we see a lot of people become first-time followers of Jesus who say, gee, faith is nothing like what I thought it was. And the teachings of Jesus are nothing like the stereotypes I'd heard about. And so it's been really interesting to watch completely hostile people end up becoming passionate followers of Jesus. It's been a joy. And I think in some sense, because that's a little bit of my story, people get the sense that I understand their pain. They understand how implausible it is at the beginning and how wondrous it is at the end. And so they I think, resonate a little bit with our church's preaching and teaching and way of life. It makes space for people on the journey towards Jesus, regardless of where they're coming from.
We'll get back to our conversation with Jon Tyson, author of the book Beautiful Resistance, in just a little bit, but want to tell you some more about our friends at Water Mission. Right now, Water Mission is working to stop the global spread of COVID-19, providing urgently needed safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions to refugee settlements and other vulnerable communities. And when we think about what Water Mission is about, they've served more than 5 million people in 56 countries, building safe water solutions that break through the global water crisis. Every time I talk about Water Mission and think about Water Mission, I just shake my head, knowing that there is a global water crisis existing right now, never more evidence of that during a pandemic, and 2.1 billion people across the world are lacking access to safe water, just simple access. 4.4 billion lacking access to adequate sanitation. And so Water Mission, their work is so important and so crucial right now, and they need your help. They would love to have you come and be a part of what they're doing by checking out their website, watermission.org. You can donate. You can simply let them know that you're behind them. You can pray for them and the work they're doing. You can hit them up on their social media pages as well. But check out their website, watermission.org, to fight the global water crisis. We're also presented today by Compassion International. And right now, Compassion is teaming up with pro athletes for children in poverty. COVID-19 and the pandemic has left nearly 70,000 children without a sponsor, the capacity of an average NFL stadium. So as the world is in the grips of COVID-19, it's led to more sickness. Parents can't work. Food is scarce. So Compassion is teaming up with some of our pro athlete friends right now to respond to this challenge, to fill a stadium, 70,000 children without a sponsor. We want to save those 70,000 children, and Compassion and pro athletes are joining up, teaming up to do just that. And they want to invite you to be a part of it as well. You can donate right now to help children through the critical 12 months, every donation helping to fill a seat toward a year of needed funding for these children that may be left without a sponsor. Check out the website, compassion.com/teamup, compassion.com/teamup, and pray about releasing a child from poverty with your donation today. Now back to our conversation with Jon Tyson right here on Sports Spectrum. So everything that you described in being life-giving and terrifying and painful and hard, I guess, gets ratcheted up a million times over when you add a pandemic, right? Especially in New York.
Oh, mate, where to begin?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like the city was on life support a couple months back. My whole family got COVID. So I had it, my wife had it, and both my kids had it.
Wow.
So this was not like some distant reality. My wife was terribly sick for a month, bedridden. It was very, very dark and painful season.
Hmm.
I was sick for about 2 weeks, but by the end of it, I was like, I think I'm going to be fine. My kids, young and healthy, they were like, went to bed a couple of nights and sort of woke up, felt fine.
Yeah.
But trying to pastor through that and then see so many people lose their lives and such psychic fear grip the city. We're 2 blocks from Times Square. We're on 45th and 9th. And so watching a place that's one of the busiest places on earth just turn into a ghost town was so concerning. It was so tragic. Some mornings I would go out early to pray and walk around, and I was the only person in Times Square. It was like a dystopian future, man. I mean, it was just, I am legend is what it felt like. So it's definitely come back since then.
Yeah.
But I am concerned about, rising increases around the States and, that having further ramifications in the city. But New York's a strong city, man. A lot of people have left the city, but a lot of the original spirit of New York, a lot of those people are going to move to the city for the first time. So I'm excited about helping rebuild the city. I said we've been there 15 years. By God's grace and God's will, we'll be there another 25. We love it. It's our home. So we'll see how it shakes out.
I don't want to go too deep into it, but if you want to, you can. But the idea of getting COVID when you got it, how soon after everything happened did you get it? And, or were you one of the early?
Yeah, man, I got it like in the first week.
Did you really?
Yeah, man, like right away, right at the start of March. I mean, I think I got it. I think I got it the first Sunday church services were cancelled.
Yeah.
Because that's the first Sunday we did church online, and our whole team, maybe 20 people, gathered in the office without any sort of awareness of we're all washing our hands and hugging each other.
There was no masks at that
time.
No,
there's no concept. And I think that's where I got it. And a bunch of people who were there that Sunday ended up getting it too. So that was very, very early on. And the weather was bad too. And so it was cold. You were sick. There was so much fear in the air in the city. And so my wife, I mean, I think the survival rates when you go on a ventilator are like 15%. It's almost like 85% fatal. And so my wife probably should have been hospitalized, but she was like, they're going to put me on a ventilator and that's going to be the end of me. And remember back then you were quarantined, so no one could come. You couldn't sit with your sick family members. Yeah. And she was like, I do not want to be in a hospital room breathing off a machine on my own. So it was heavy, man. It was real.
Yeah, that is real. Last couple questions here with Jon Tyson on Sports Spectrum. He's got the new book out. It's called Beautiful Resistance, The Joy of Conviction in a Culture of Compromise. Go get it. It is available now. What's the great lesson that the Lord has shown you, Jon, in all of this? This goes back to March, I guess, now, when you probably first started going through COVID, not just as a pastor, but literally recovering from COVID-19, you and your family. But what has God shown you and taught you through the spring, through the summer? What's the great lesson that you look at the Lord and say, man, this is what he's showing me?
It's probably two things. Number one, it's like how important relationships are. Just like how much we are designed to be in community and to love one another and to care for each other's needs in person. Like I have felt the beauty of the body of Christ. Most of our society doesn't have rich social networks. You've got your few core friends, but followers of Jesus in churches have a theoretically a loving network of care and compassion around them. And so I've just seen how important relationships are and how beautiful Jesus' teachings are around love, loving one another, laying down our lives for each other. So I've been on the receiving end of so much care, and I feel like our church has done a beautiful job of being the hands and feet of Jesus. The second thing I think, and maybe the most important thing, is just how fragile life is. And, we as a society do everything within our power to remove death from our public consciousness. And it's the most serious issue any of us will ever face. We will all die. And yet we live in a society that lives in a delusion like it's not even a major factor. And so we basically treat our salvation like some, some long-term stock investment that you hope when you pay off is there in the account and then you'll be okay in retirement, rather than viewing it as like our true living hope that we are made for eternity and we need to prepare ourselves to meet God. So a lot of mortality, a lot of reflection on the sort of the fragile nature of life, and a longing to explore what heaven is actually going to be like. That's probably the thing I'm most grateful for, deep reflection on our eternal destiny, which I think we'd all do well to try and cultivate. And
it's such a weird thing too, right? Because we get scared, like, oh my gosh, if I start thinking about heaven or death, that, it's going to come tomorrow, and, it's 100% success rate, unfortunately,
That's
the whole
right.
death thing. But I think even people of faith worry that if they start thinking about that or talking about that it becomes morbid. It becomes, it's the taboo topic, right? You don't even hear that talked about a lot in churches.
What's really morbid is people dying and you have no resources of either preparation, consolation, or that's what's morbid. And that's why I think people have just been so stunned. They've been so stunned. And yes, historically, the Christian tradition has had a very, very healthy and helpful way of preparing our souls to enter into an eternal state. And this is an opportunity to reclaim that in a life-giving way. There's a great journey you're going to take. You can't come back from it. You should probably get ready for it. And it's going to be more beautiful or more terrible than you can comprehend based on how you prepare now. We should reclaim a little bit of that. That's what I think a lot of people have sort of taken away as well. Let me get ready for the heavier things of life.
Yeah, well, that's what we're doing. And a great way to do that is to read Beautiful Resistance, the Jon Tyson book that is out now, The Joy of Conviction in a Culture of Compromise. Go get a copy. It's available everywhere books are sold. Jon, thank you for the time, my friend. Great to meet you. We'll do it again. And this is awesome. Yeah. Maybe I'll come down and see you guys in person sometime.
Mate, please do. Whenever services are allowed back on, please come visit us. We'd love to have you.
Love that. Thanks, Marty. Thanks for being on the show.
Yes, no worries.
And many thanks to Jon Tyson for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. Again, he's a pastor and a church planner down in New York City, originally from Adelaide, Australia. And he moved here more than 2 decades ago with a passion to seek and cultivate renewal in the Western church. He is doing just that in a very tough place to minister and share the gospel in New York City, in Manhattan. And he's also a writer, and he's a darn good one. And his new book, Beautiful Resistance, The Joy of Conviction in a Culture of Compromise, is dynamite. It's out now. It released July 21st. You can get a copy everywhere books are sold. And go support Jon Tyson. He's doing a really good work. And I just loved his heart and his humility to just share the gospel and help cultivate relationships with people and help them grow in their faith. And a lot of good stuff there. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Jon Tyson. Many thanks to him. And many thanks to our sponsors and partners today, Water Mission and Compassion. You can check them out. Water Mission, their website, watermission.org. You can learn more and pray with them as they fight the global water crisis. And then Compassion, teaming up with pro athletes to help release children from poverty. You can go to the website, compassion.com/team up and support the great work that they are doing as well. Thank you again for tuning into today's episode on the podcast. You can also check out our website, sportspectrum.com, the home base for all of our content here at the Ministry of Sports Spectrum. Right there on the website, you got a daily devotional. You got articles all day long on the intersection of sports and faith. And then you have every single podcast episode that we've done here at Sports Spectrum right there on the website, sportspectrum.com. And the last thing I'll ask from you, if you're willing, would be to go to whatever app that you're listening to this podcast on, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Google Play or Stitcher, wherever you're going. Could you do us a favor and just leave a review? Simply leave. It would be great to leave a 5-star review, but maybe, the podcast isn't 5-star in your opinion, and that's okay. But a review helps get the word out and helps just let people know about Sports Spectrum especially through the Apple Podcast app. And of course, if you like what you heard, share it. Please go to your social media pages, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can tag us, you can @ us, and we'll make sure we retweet it and just let us know that you heard our podcast. We'd love to get the word out, continue getting the word out on Sports Spectrum. We appreciate you. We love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. My name is Jason Romano, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.